Earlier this week in Idaho, Bernie Sanders took to the Fighting Oligarchy Tour stage to defend American democracy. This included rosy versions of our nation's birth and a repetition of Joe Biden's talking point about America being the envy of the world.
We take, as Americans, as the longest standing democracy on earth, as a country that the whole world has historically looked up to. And they say, we want to be like America.
He defended FDR, who was once the strikebreaker-in-chief and the president that imprisoned thousands of Japanese Americans in U.S. concentration camps during World War II.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of the great presidents in American history.
Not only does his opinion align with all the defenders of American capitalism, but his statements on imperialism are a blatant rewrite of history.
For the first time in the 250-year history of our country, we have a president who is aligning himself with dictatorship abroad.
To fight Trump, we don't need to lie about the U.S. role in dictatorship abroad. Most U.S. presidents have supported dictators. It's U.S. imperialist policy to do so. Bernie certainly remembers Batista in Cuba, Somoza in Nicaragua, Marcos in the Philippines, Mubarak and el-Sisi in Egypt, and Pinochet in Chile. All were dictators supported by the US government. In fact, as recently as 2023, Bernie was talking about the US-backed murder of Salvador Allende and the dictatorship of Pinochet. And let's just forget about the dictators for 1 second. The US government has backed and funded terrorist groups and coups all around the world for decades. Far from being a beacon of democracy, the US government and the president have always been involved with dictatorship, regime change, and political repression. It's weird enough that he tries to whitewash the history of US imperialism prior to Trump, but he goes even further by parroting the warmonger propaganda about the US proxy war in Ukraine.
No, President Trump, Ukraine did not start that war. Russia did.
The truth is, the US under Biden provoked the war in Ukraine. It was the decades-long aggression and incitement by NATO and US imperialism that forced this outcome. Namely, the building of Western military installments and regime changes closer and closer to the Russian border, despite promises that they weren't going to do that. And even though Ukraine and NATO have lost this war, the US is the only reason why they continue to throw Ukrainian workers into a meat grinder, all on the dime of American taxpayers.
But it's not just Ukraine. Trump is following in the rather unfortunate behavior of Joe Biden and wants billions of dollars more to fund Netanyahu's war machine in Gaza.
When Bernie took up the issue of Gaza, an energy shift happened in the crowd. Clearly, this is something that the crowd wanted a firm stance on. But instead, he repeated the stock liberal line.
Israel, like any country on earth, has the right to defend itself from terrorism, but it does not have the right to wage all-out war against the Palestinian people.
Some supporters unfurled a Palestinian flag. You can see the support for the banner in the crowd as the Forbes camera pans away from the flag. People are clapping. He characterizes this as Netanyahu's war as if it isn't led by the entirety of the Israeli state, with the very essential backing of US imperialism with billions and billions of dollars. When police attempted to pull the flag up and started to arrest those holding it, this put the brakes on his speech because people started booing. So what did Bernie do once he saw what was happening? He could have protested or put a stop to the arrest. He could have affirmed the solidarity with Palestine demonstrated by the crowd, and connected the need to fight Trumpism and the billionaires with the fight against imperialism in Gaza. But he doesn't.
Okay, in America today, we have more income. In America today,
He actually deflects the whole topic by saying that he's going to solve it through Congress, which is the same actor bankrolling the slaughter.
Let me move on to, I know that this is a sensitive issue, something I am helping leading the effort in Congress. But I do want to say, hold it. What we have also got to focus on is the crisis facing not only the people in Gaza, but the crisis facing the working class of this country.
He actually separates the issues and pushes on with his prepared speech. Bernie did not defend the rights of his supporters as they were dragged away by police at his own rally against the oligarchy, which makes his parting words even more strange. He did nothing to stop it, he did nothing to defend his supporters, and he did not share the solidarity with the crowd. But ironically, he dishes out this quote by Frederick Douglass.
Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
There's a point at the end that we agree with Bernie on.
What the ruling class of this country wants you to believe is that you are powerless. They got all the money, they own the media, they own the economy, they own the political process. You got nothing. That's what they want you to believe. This country belongs to all of us, not the billionaire class.
But how do we fight this class? It should be stated very clearly. This country has always been ruled by the capitalists. The state has been made for them. Their two parties have always served them. What we need is a class-independent, working-class party to take power and democratically run society without the billionaires. But Bernie insists on corralling all the discontent right back into the discredited Democratic Party, talking about how great America used to be before some bad people got into office, implying that the fact that we're ruled by a parasitic minority of capitalists is a new thing that Trump invented. Bernie can't say and do what is necessary because he's not a communist. He's not fighting for revolution. He acknowledges class, but does not want to fight a class war. He wants to work within the same system that has pushed him out of the presidential race twice, and which is discredited in the eyes of his supporters. This is not a new strategy for Bernie, as we said in the last episode of Communists of America. Let's hear from our comrades in the Revolutionary Communists of America who got politicized by Bernie and then moved beyond him on the basis of their disappointment and their experience.
So in high school, I read the Communist Manifesto because I had to. It was an assignment. And I immediately was like, well, I guess I'm a communist. This is the best thing I've ever read. But there was nothing in the United States to do with that new knowledge until Bernie ran for president 10 years later. And I'm like, finally, it's cool to be a socialist again. And like, we could have a socialist president.
In 2015, 2016, I was definitely a huge Sanders supporter. At the time, after the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, in the context of the weakest economic recovery in U.S. history post-2008, I was really, really ecstatic that someone was fighting the billionaires, refusing corporate donations, running on a campaign only built around like individual, working supporters' donations. And I was also really attracted to the fact that he was using the term socialism. For me, that was proof that, oh, look, millions of Americans aren't turned off by socialism. In fact, they're quite interested and enthusiastic about it if they are shown that socialism actually means a fight against the billionaires, against the rich, and against the political establishment. And I volunteered for Bernie throughout 2016.
Bernie's really the first guy who put socialism on the map for me. I voted for him in 2016. His appeals for free healthcare for all, free education, all of these ideas, they really resonated with me at the time.
I had moved towards Bernie while I was working at a charter school. It was a conservative charter school. I felt like I was the rebel in the office of like this fishbowl of 60 people because everyone else was living relatively traditional lives. And I was in favor of Medicare for all. But after Bernie's capitulation, there didn't feel like there was any steam to move forward or that there was anything to get involved with.
Suddenly, he's not running for president anymore, and I was really confused why, because, some people were saying it was the Democrats who betrayed him, and some pieces of news would say, well, he lost elections, which I think wasn't true. And then, really the truth was that he gave up, he gave in, but I didn't realize that.
I did start to read a little bit more about socialism and then eventually about communism after he dropped out of the race in 2016. I had a very distorted and confused view of communism. I didn't really get organized in any way, and most of the ideas that I had about communism came from the internet left at the time.
He capitulated to Hillary Clinton. And for me, I don't know if I would use the term demoralizing, but it definitely was upsetting. And I ended up protesting Hillary at the Democratic National Convention. And I was definitely still looking for an outlet. I'm very proud of myself to say that I did not vote for Hillary in 2016, or Trump for that matter. I on my own maintained a little bit of class independence, but I was still looking for an outlet, looking for something to actually do to fight the billionaires. And in 2017, very, very accidentally, I ended up in a meeting of what later became the RCA, 5 or 6 comrades or so. And they explained to me what Marxism is, what communism is, the need for working class independence. And they showed me what they had been writing and explaining about the Bernie Sanders phenomenon for years that I thought was very, very attuned with my understanding of things. And I think a lot of other people's supportive, understanding of things. And in a certain way, Bernie Sanders' arrival on the scene was very indicative of the potential for socialism, the potential for radicalism, and the building an independent working class party. That was a positive development, but ultimately it was taken in the wrong direction by Bernie.
It wasn't until I had found the RCA a couple of years later that I had already read Marx and I had read Lenin, and I had been drawn to the ideas generally, but actually meeting a unapologetic communist in the flesh actually drew me into the organization, into the need for political life. And I went through a number of different changes in 2018 and 2019 when I had gotten involved with the party, but just the amount of passion and the genuine desire to change the entire world in this root and branch way, and there was nothing quite like that. And so it was interesting when Bernie ended up running again in 2020 and going to some of the rallies, then putting forward the paper and putting forward the ideas, that we were finding other people who were also interested, generally speaking, but there was still these illusions just before the COVID-19 pandemic.
When 2020 rolled around, I was in grad school at the time, and of course his same calls for free education really resonated with me once again. I had over $200,000 in student debt from grad school, and I was a bit more familiar with the ideas of socialism and communism.
After Bernie was pushed out of the race and he capitulated again, and we met a lot of people from the Democratic Socialists of America, for instance, who were looking for a much more radical answer than just tailing the Democrats. We grew quite a bit in that period.
I saw how he was snubbed out of the race in 2020. He was working through a party that was working against him. I was already feeling pretty down because this was in the midst of the pandemic. It was in April, so the pandemic had been going strong for a month. And I opened my phone to see Bernie Sanders drops out of the race, and it just shattered my heart. This was the second time Bernie had capitulated, and I was absolutely distraught. I don't recommend this for most people, but in this one instance, it worked in my favor. Someone had posted a link to a statement put out by the then IMT, or International Marxist Tendency, that said, "Don't mourn, organize." And I think that was exactly what I needed to read at that time. So I clicked on the link, I read the statement, and all of it is exactly what I had already had on my mind. Ever since then, I have been a member of the RCA.
A DSA chapter popped up in my area in Arizona, which like was considered at the time a conservative stronghold with like Joe Arpaio and like just horrible, horrible immigration policies. So I was really excited because I could go be a socialist. Like finally I can be a socialist. But I get there and it's like, it's a bunch of activism, right? And it's like, let's go protest in front of Lockheed Martin with 5 other people and do stuff like go to the border and try to alleviate the crisis by like hiding water in the dirt. And like, that is really valiant stuff. But what I wanted was to get rid of capitalism because I was a socialist. Like I wanted to get rid of that stuff, like end it for good. And then I dropped out. I stopped going because I was depressed. I felt hopeless. That all I could do was like chip away at the problem and never really fix it. And then, I don't know, related to that, and also my mental health, I had like one of the worst depression crises I've ever had. And I was just like, I gotta get out of my house. Like, I gotta go try again. So I go back to DSA like a year later. But this time I'm like, I want to think about what I'm doing. Like, I want to figure out how to actually end this. And luckily at the time there was a political education series and they were reading Marx. And I was like, oh, I like this. This is what I wanted to figure out because I want to figure out what to do about this. And it happened to be run by comrades in an organization that were communists and were actually saying verbatim, we can have socialism in our lifetime. Here's how. And it turned out to be the RCA under a different name. And now I'm a member.
And now with this Fight Oligarchy tour, I think what is really promising, not about the tour itself, but the energy that it's attracting. Because Sanders hasn't really changed. He's giving the same message that he's been giving for the last 9 years, which is essentially to work within the left of the possible, so to speak, to work within the Democratic Party. But the people that we meet there, we ask them, do you have any faith in the Democratic Party to change society? And they say, no, why would I have any faith in the Democratic Party to do that? And we ask them, if they think there should be a class-independent workers' party in this country. And they say, absolutely, I register as an independent. But every single person that we talked to at this recent Tempe, Arizona rally, they describe themselves as an independent, right? I think what this really shows is that people are moving away from traditional politics, or moving away from the realm of the possible, quote unquote, to understanding that we have to move beyond these institutions. Everyone recognizes that the liberals aren't going to do anything to oppose Trumpism, and neither are the liberal socialists going to be able to do anything. And what we need is a revolutionary program that's going to change society entirely.
We can build that party that can, at a certain point, galvanize and organize those same types of workers who have all of the right instincts in looking for a political alternative to the establishment.
He had this massive potential to break from the two-party system, to gather these forces and build a mass workers' party. He failed to do that. And it really led a lot of people that I know, a lot of leftists, down this road of demoralization, of doom and despair. And now that I'm a member, I'm really trying to prevent that doom and despair from spreading too much, and showing my friends and also just people in the streets that there is another option, that we can build a mass working class party, and that we shouldn't mourn, but we should instead get organized.